Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another CARS Reading Skills Workshop as part of your Jack Westin MCAT Podcast. As always, you're joined by Molly and Usher, your hosts for this podcast. Now, in this episode, we're going to be going through our Jack Westin Daily CARS passage titled Hamburger University. This is the passage from February 18th. Now, if you're listening to this on February 18th, you could find this passage on our homepage, jackwestin.com, so you can follow along with us. Or you can click on the link in the description so you can see the passage as we're going through. As always, it's nice to have some exposure to the passage itself before listening, if you can, just so you can get an idea of what you thought was important as you read, so you can compare it to what we are going to break down about this passage as we read. So let's go ahead and hop in. Hamburger University. This is kind of a fun passage. I don't know about you, Usher, but I found this to be a pretty fun read because it's not about, ancient architecture or art or philosophy. It's about like company culture, basically. Cool.
Yeah, I really liked it. I also liked, the title, Hamburger University.
Yes.
I remember when I visited Chicago, this was like one of the first places that it's like a really popular place, I guess everyone goes to. And it was so cool to see in real life. So I don't know, I got kind of excited looking at the name. So
I know it sounds fun. It sounds like a more lighthearted Cars passage to do, which is always
yeah,
nice when you have that like sort of comic relief thrown in there among all of the very serious topics. Awesome. Well, I can't wait. So let's go ahead and hop in. Usher, lead us through.
good. All right. So let's start with this first paragraph. In the early 1980s, culture became a buzzword in management studies. Okay, so here they're telling us culture quotes became a buzzword. Why? I'm not too sure yet, but what I just know from the sentence is that it's popular, right? In the 80s. Okay, so looking for maybe why it's popular as I'm continuing to read here. Soon a corporate culture, often equated with a mission statement, had become the sine qua non of any serious organization. I hope I said that right, but it seems here they're kind of saying that like having a corporate culture it sort of became seen as required, right, for like real organization. So it's kind of like a necessary aspect. So I guess that's kind of getting into why it's important, why it's a buzzword. So not completely, but I'm starting to understand a little bit. Both researchers in organizational studies and practicing managers look to anthropological ideas of culture for a metaphor for new forms of organizing in the postmodern political economy. Okay, so now I've got, you know, something that's really expanding upon what we started with here, right? We have this idea where scholars, we have researchers and managers, right? And they sort of borrowed anthropology's idea of culture to describe the new ways companies are organized, right? We're using culture as a way to describe organization. It's a metaphor for new forms of organizing, they say. So I think here is kind of the answer to our question, right? Why is it a buzzword? Why is it important? It's because they're using it to organize. So I think here I'd probably want to track that idea and say something along the lines of, paragraph one, culture, and then maybe an arrow, organizing companies. So, or organization. What did you think of this paragraph, Molly? Any thoughts here?
What you just did was beautiful. Okay, right? Because you start out with this idea of culture and you point out it's in quotes, right? Anytime you see quotations around a single word or a phrase, and it's not like, oh, someone said this word, it's not an actual quotation from a person, it's really important to hone into. Because the author is drawing your attention to it. They're using those quotes to maybe suggest that they're not using culture in the way that you would normally think, right? Or they're saying, this word is very critical to my argument. I'm going to define it for you, right? So whenever you see quotes around things, it could be an indication of, I'm being sarcastic with my use of this word, or maybe I want to, again, draw your attention to how I want you to think about this word. Right. So we get that clue in paragraph or in sentence one about culture. It's clearly going to be an important idea in this paragraph. And then you're constantly looking for Well, why is it a buzzword? Why? Why is okay, it's important, but why, right? The why is so critical. Um, we sometimes say in our courses, it's like you need to read like a third grader, right? Or like read like a 5-year-old, right? Kids love asking the why questions, and it drives everyone crazy sometimes in a good way. It's like, just accept it. No, why? Why is it? Right? You're constantly looking for meaning in what the author is saying. If you just take it at face value and just run your eyes over it, you're never going to find that deeper meaning. So I feel like that was a perfect demonstration of constantly asking why and being inquisitive. Why is it a buzzword? Right? That first sentence, that's a clear argument, but it's not very tangible yet. And we had to wait and watch it develop. And we're constantly asking, why is it a buzzword? What does it do for us? Why is it important? And you're right, in that last sentence, I feel like we got some more confusing language in it, and yet the parts that were clear were really clear, right?
Right.
Managers and researchers are looking at culture to help them organize. Culture is important for organizing companies, right? And that is a short and sweet idea. It collects everything that we've gotten so far. I think that's a perfect thing to map. So hats off to you, Usher.
Thank you, Molly. I appreciate it. And yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it also lets you, like kind of what you're describing, thinking about the why, also lets you do a lot of active reading, which is of
Yes.
course better than just, reading to read. So, anyways, guys, let's go ahead and jump into the next paragraph. So here's a paragraph two. Companies are using both old and new ideas of culture as tools of management. So we still have, this culture quoted, but now I'm seeing something new, like no pun intended, but we have that they're using old and new ideas of culture. I haven't heard them describe that yet, so I'm kind of keeping this in mind. Like, what is old? What is new? Next sentence. Some managements emphasize that the company is a clearly demarcated entity with a boundary against its environment, containing specified groups of people organized hierarchically, each with a checklist of the behaviors which constitute company culture. Okay, super long sentence there, right? But I'm going to try to break it down as simply as possible, right? So there's a demarcated entity, right? The company is demarcated, so with a boundary against its environment. So those two things kind of mean the same thing, right? Like we're separated within the company, and we have groups of different people in a hierarchy, and they each follow their own kind of list of rules. So here I'm kind of getting this idea that some companies are treating culture as fixed rules inside like a hierarchy, right? For example, McDonald's marks out its space and identity with the Golden Arches logo and standardized decor and food containers. Okay, now we're kind of painting a picture, right? We're giving a specific example, which is McDonald's, and they're kind of using this standardized branding to, define their identity. The core beliefs, the core beliefs of the company culture, quality, service, convenience, and value, are drummed into managers at Hamburger University to bond the far-flung franchisees together, right? So here we're kind of saying that in addition to, of course, like the actual logo, like kind of how it looks and everything, we're also training the people that work at McDonald's at Hamburger University, um, in the same sort of values, right? In these same sort of shared values. And that kind of unifies all the locations, right? So we started off with this idea of, oh, we have this clear entity, right? We have this clear sort of image or, boundary that we're kind of showing. We talked about the decor, and now it's not just the decor, but it's also the managers, right? I still don't really have an idea of like what old and new is. Like I haven't really seen them mention that ever since the start, but I am seeing new stuff regardless. Counter staff have to follow a checklist of standardized behaviors in performing each task, right down to when to make eye contact and at what points to smile at a customer during a transaction. So again, right, we're getting even more into this example, right? They're painting a very, very clear picture. Now we're talking about the counter staff. We talked about managers, talked about decor, and now we're saying that, the people up front that are working, right? They're kind of following these exact like rules for behavior, right? Even coming down all the way to eye contact and smiling, right? They are following their training that they got, and the company is all sort of unified, in following these sort of rules. in this example, the old idea, all right, there we go. We're finally mentioning, something here that relates to that first sentence. In this example, the old idea of culture as a bounded entity with a fixed identity and checklist of characteristics is deployed in a centralized system of command and control. Okay, again, we've got, a lot of sort of big words here, but I think what they're trying to say is that this is an example of the old idea of culture, right? In this example, the old idea of culture. So we talked about old and new. We didn't really, or we mentioned old and new. We didn't actually talk about the new part from what I saw, but we're talking about the old idea of culture in this example with McDonald's. And it's essentially a system of command and control, right? So it's sort of top down control through these sort of fixed rules that they've created, right? Everyone is following this checklist. So this is probably what I'd want to track, right? We introduced this idea of old and new, but this paragraph was really focusing on the old. So I'd probably say something along the lines of P2, old, old idea of culture or old management, something of that nature. And then, say I probably put an arrow, put like fixed rules or just fixed, if you can remember that. And then probably also put McDonald's or HU next to it. That way, I kind of capture all the relevance because I think that, there's a lot that's important to keep track of here. What did you think of this paragraph, Molly?
Yeah, this paragraph I feel like is so fun. It's so fun because they do a bunch of things that are present in many cars passages. Okay, so first thing, first sentence, we talk about old and new. Okay, as soon as you hear that, you should be, on your toes. Okay, because they love AMC, cars passages in general, they love giving you two sort of competing ideas. They might not be completely mutually exclusive, I don't know, but the author has separated them into an old idea of culture and a new. Okay, I want to know what those are, especially because they're saying companies are using both. Now, in this paragraph, we ended up clarifying we're talking about the old here, which means in our next paragraph, paragraph 3, I'm hoping to see new. Maybe paragraph 3 will be about old also, then hopefully it's in paragraph 4. Like at some point in this passage, the author kind of owes you to explain what new is. We want to be on the lookout for it because, that could be the source of a source of questions, right? Like, hey, does this scenario illustrate an old idea of culture or a new idea, right? So make sure you know what those are. It's important whenever you start with that sort of dichotomy, old and new, or, situation one or situation two. We also had kind of another fun characteristic of this paragraph, which is we got lost in a little bit of jargon in sentence two, pretty difficult to read, and then we jump straight into an example, right? And we're coming from they use both old and new. So we now get this very specific example about McDonald's, and we still don't really know what the example is used to exemplify, right? Like what is this? I get it. It's clear, it's easy to follow. For me, I'm thinking McDonald's is showing like very scripted behaviors. Like again, down to the, eye contact. There's a script for how to work at McDonald's in management, right? What is this? Is this old? Is this new? Last sentence we get that it's old. It's uncomfortable when cars passages do this, but the moral of this story here in paragraph 2 is if you start to feel like you're going off on a tangent, especially with an example that's as vivid as this one, and you're not sure what idea it's used to represent, keep reading. Okay, because sometimes they do what they've done here in P2, which is the argument that this example is used to support actually comes after they have given you all of the context, right? They basically set the stage such that when they said this was the old idea of culture as a bounded entity with a fixed identity, which is kind of weird to understand, but it sounds like it's fixed and it's like scripted, right? It's static. It's not really changing. That idea, as soon as they say it, you immediately understand because they've already supported it before they even said it. So P2, I mean, you did a wonderful job with this, Usher. I feel like this one has a lot that we can learn from because they do things like this always. And by they, I mean test writers, right? They'll give you a dichotomy and you need to be on the lookout for what old and new is. And they will give you a lot of context before they actually tell you why. When you do that, or when they do that, just keep reading. Find find the value that you can while you are reading the example or the context, but constantly be looking for why are you mentioning this? It all comes back to that existential question of why. Why is this here? Why are you saying this? Why are you wasting some of your valuable 600 words to tell me about McDonald's? In the last sentence, we got it. So great job. I think that was a super fun paragraph.
Molly, I appreciate your input, and I absolutely agree with you. Let's go ahead and jump into paragraph three. In other industries, managers are using new ideas of culture as an image for new forms of organizing. Okay, thank God, right? Like we've got finally, we're mentioning new now, right? I was wondering, okay, well, we mentioned old. When are we going to mention new? And like Molly had mentioned, keep reading, right? These the arguments will be addressed, especially something is left unsaid, like we saw here. Now we're jumping into new. So now we're again jumping into the new idea of culture, and again we're mentioning that it's a new form of organizing, which all relates back to what we initially said about culture in paragraph one, right? That it's used for organizing. Next sentence, this is especially true in industries where products are designed, manufactured, distributed, and marketed all in different countries. As with computer or phone companies, with stores all over the globe, corporate offices in New York or London, and factories in China. We've got a bunch of different examples listed here, but the big thing is that they're just saying, well, all of these places use this new idea of culture, right? Global industries need, this sort of new culture idea that that fits and spreads across different countries and different industries. To stay competitive, products are continually redeveloped, and the sites of production, the employees, and relations between them are forever changing. So we're seeing more about this new idea of culture now, I'd say, right? Initially, we just said, okay, well, we're using this new idea of culture. It's a new way of organizing. Okay, all these different places are using them. But now we kind of have this idea where we have constant change, right? We have forever changing aspects of each of these companies. And it's kind of allowing the workers and the companies to keep adapting, right? They're continuously changing. This new version of culture is meant to guarantee companies a flexible existence. Okay, so now we have kind of laid out exactly what they're trying to define this new version of culture as, or exactly what it provides, right? This new version of culture provides flexibility. That's what we saw, discussed in this paragraph as well, right? This new idea of culture is spread all throughout the world. It allows for a constant change, right? And so in the end, what does that all mean? It means that we're getting flexibility. So this is probably something I'd want to track right here. I'd probably just write something like new culture, arrow, flexible, something like that. What do you think of this paragraph, Molly?
Love it. Yeah, we actually finally get new. So sometimes the author's going to make you wait for it for a while, right? They gave us, hey, companies use old and new. We defined old as being fixed. We got our definition of new right after, and that's lovely, right? It won't always be the case, but P3, we got what new is. And when, especially coming from P2, we've set up old and new as different, right? Clearly, companies can use both at the same time, but old and new are different. We want to be on the lookout for that here, right? Now, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to recognize a pattern where the author is not giving their most important sentence at the very beginning of the paragraph. I get questions from students all the time in office hours and in courses like, hey, Molly, can I just read the first sentence of every paragraph and call it a day? Just map that sentence and move on. The answer is definitely not, right? Some authors will lead with their most important idea. That'll be the first sentence of each paragraph, in which case, cool. You'd still miss out on context if you only read the first sentence, of course. But in a paragraph like this, you get a topic sentence, you get a bunch of like context, sometimes an example as we define it, sometimes just like kind of a laundry list of different things going on. And then this author gets to their most important point towards the end. Okay, right? Like there's no one way to write a CARS passage. In my eyes, I always think about it as like personality traits or even just ways of organizing your own speech. right? Every person you meet has a different voice, a different way of conveying ideas. Same thing with writing. There's no one size fits all with cars. You got to read the whole thing. You got to be on your toes when you read it. That being said, as you continue to read within a singular passage, you might start to pick up on trends. Again, I think this passage, we might start to see a couple key arguments here towards the end of the paragraph. Um, One other thing that was interesting about this one, right, as compared to paragraph two, that McDonald's example was really specific, right? Like that McDonald's example with multiple sentences, very specific. To me, that was what really helped me understand what the old idea of culture was. Here, we kind of got a list of different uh, ideas that fit this. The computer phone companies in New York, London, factories in China. I feel like this was not quite as specific as what we had talked about with McDonald's. It's still worth, tracking and worth reading, of course, but like I'm also keeping in mind the amount of support that's given to these different ideas, right? So maybe you put that in your map, maybe you don't, but I think it's important to keep track of these things that are brought up to help you understand a new company culture versus old. So we're on the lookout. We know old is static, it's scripted, it's, kind of fixed or inflexible. New, completely flexible. I know how these two are different. What I'm kind of curious about now is like, well, how do you have both? Like, are we going to favor one or the other? Again, I don't know yet. We have three more paragraphs, but I'm very interested for the author to make a claim about how companies are navigating both of them. They seem pretty different to me. So I'm excited to keep reading.
And thank you for that, Molly. I really like how you defined the old one, right? You were like the old is well, the new is flexible, and the old is like inflexible. I feel like that keeps it simple, and that's really a nice way of going about it. All right. Paragraph 4. Gregory Harvey describes companies whose material presence might be no more than a box of contracts. The list of those people who belong, temporarily and for the duration of a particular service, to the network which generates wealth and power for another equally disparate and dispersed group of investors. So here we have this Gregory Harvey person that's being introduced, right? We just got off a paragraph where we defined what the new version of culture is, and he's talking, it seems, about companies, sort of generally, right? And saying that these companies, they might be no more than a box of contracts. So for me, this is kind of a difficult sentence to define, but I'm probably thinking to myself, well, he's kind of just saying that these companies are sort of just networks of contracts, like a bunch of contracts, and they're not super like solid institutions. But I'll have to see what's the relevance of this, right, as I continue to read. Where is the organization? So, right, like if where is the actual company? If it's just kind of a box of contracts, what's actually allowing it to be an organization, right? No longer does an architectural monument symbolize the company or contain the workforce. Oh, okay. Well, architectural monument, the first thing I think of when I'm thinking about this is, they had described some of the decor with Hamburger University. And that example was very vivid and very specific, and there was a lot of detail around it. So it might be in reference to that. I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like a company, what this sentence is trying to say, is no longer tied to, some big building or a single workplace, right? Work is organized through teams or alliances, flexibly operating across boundaries and rapidly reforming in new circumstances. Okay, well, this part is kind of ringing a bell, right? Flexibly operating, rapidly reforming in new circumstances. When I see this, I'm trying to ask myself, well, how does this relate? Is it a new idea? Well, we talked about something being flexible, right? Paragraph 3, we said the new version is a flexible existence. We talked about how things are constantly changing there. And it seems like here, this paragraph is kind of in support of that same idea, right? That new culture is flexibility, and that's kind of what, everything is about now. That's kind of what we're doing now. So for this paragraph, I definitely want to continue to track the same idea we saw in paragraph 3, I'd probably just do P4, write that down, then draw a little arrow above to paragraph 3. I might also want to just put Harvey's name down, because Harvey was someone that was brought in here as makes up a lot of this paragraph and brought in as a support for that idea. So that's probably what I'd be tracking. What do you think, Mom?
Perfect. Yeah, I think one of the things that we always tell our students to focus on when they're reading a CARS passage is the clearly stated ideas and arguments that you could have a discussion about, right? It's not just a pure fact. It's not a detail. It's a claim or a perspective or an idea or an opinion made by the author, right? And I think a lot of the times when we clarify that to students, right, at the end of the day, every passage like this is a piece of persuasive writing. They're trying to convince you of something. They're not going to hide their most important crown jewel of an idea in their most complicated sentence. One of the things that I hear from students a lot in hearing that perspective is I'm concerned because sometimes you get questions about little details, right? Like, for example, you could get a question about Gregory Harvey, right? And I think some students are like, well, hey, that's a detail. I get questions about details. I can't just focus on the arguments. That being said, what you've just done here is identify the argument, the actual purpose of having this perspective in the passage. How does this fit in? Why are we talking about Harvey, right? What is the point? What is this individual's perspective being used to support, right? As far as things the author has said. And that last sentence really helped clarify it, that we're focusing on flexibility, right? And adapting to new circumstances. This is very much illustrating what we had talked about in paragraph 3, which this makes perfect sense why you draw an arrow. But I think just to, really reiterate the things that we talk about in our courses and actually in our free sessions as well, right? You want to focus on the arguments. And when you see details that support that argument, right? If it's just a sentence, they're just restating it or they're throwing in a fact, okay, probably not important to map. Okay, but if it's a person specifically that's being cited as support for this, like this person, Gregory Harvey, believes that we currently are using a new version of culture that's helping us be flexible. I want to focus on the idea and just make sure that in my brain, I am tying Harvey to that idea. That's it. I don't care about the exact words of his quote. If I got a question about Gregory Harvey's perspective, I don't need to go back and reread it. All I need is to look down at my map and see, okay, Harvey's idea is from paragraph 4, and that paragraph served to repeat what we had introduced in P3 about new culture being or providing flexibility. Okay, that's it. That's going to be enough to answer these questions, anything they could ask you about Harvey. Okay, so when you get a question that feels really specific and you've got your spidey sense tingling of I need to go back and reread, I want to challenge you, look down at your map. Do you have anything about that detail in there as an example or as an individual that's cited in support of it? If so, just find the argument it's connected to. You don't have to go back. So I feel like you did a beautiful job with this, tracking the repeated ideas. And then when you see, the details that are really helping explain and support, just like McDonald's did earlier, getting that in your map will prevent that instinct to go back and reread, and it'll help you move through the questions confidently and time efficiently, which can make a huge, huge difference in your score. So great job.
Absolutely. Thank you, Molly. Well, let's go ahead and jump into paragraph 5, guys. Such companies who look for staff who are prepared continually to reskill themselves, engage in personal reinvention to cope with risks and new situations, and acquire a portfolio of experiences and contacts to help them hop from job to job. Euphemisms for workers on short-term contracts with no job security or career structure who have periodically to retrain at their own expense and are handling the high stress levels. Well, this is, obviously very tough for these workers, but this is kind of a, interesting detail, right? We mentioned earlier that with the new idea of culture, we have to be flexible. We're constantly changing. We're always adapting, right? And now we're focusing on kind of a specific aspect of that change, right? We're talking about the staff, we're talking about the workers and how they have to constantly, sort of retrain and job hop. And this comes with insecurity and it comes with stress, right? Insecurity in that there's no job security, right? They don't have any structure to their careers. They're just, going from job to job and doing whatever that they possibly can, which is of course very stressful. So it's pretty interesting to see that, right? And I think that we're still kind of in that discussion of the new idea of culture, just getting a bit more specific and talking about the workers here. So let's go ahead and jump into the next sentence. And there's only two sentences in this paragraph. In order to harness workers' knowledge, managers want staff to feel empowered to participate in mixed teams of managers and workers and to put forward new ideas for products or ways of organizing. Okay, so well now we're talking about the managers, right? So we talked. I guess we're talking about the specific staff when it comes to this new idea of culture, and here it, it's pretty. They're emphasizing the retraining, the job hopping. So that's why I'm repeating this idea of the new idea of culture and flexibility aspect. So I think here for this paragraph, we kind of have some supporting details for that argument, right? I probably want to put down, I want to track this paragraph and put P5, P3, or P5, just draw an arrow up. I think, though, that, we do have this idea of, wanting staff to feel empowered. I actually haven't seen that yet. It may not necessarily be very like a clear argument, but for me, personally, I can get kind of uncomfortable if I just, if it doesn't hurt me too much, I might write one thing. So I might write workers here or, empowered or something along that lines, just one word personally. Since, we are sort of just repeating that idea, but we do have some more specifics that they're kind of painting a picture of. What do you think, Molly?
Yeah, absolutely. Because in this paragraph, it feels like we're still talking about flexibility, right? We're talking about continually reskilling, we're reinventing ourselves to cope with risks and new situations, right? To change jobs, you want to empower employees to mix things up, new ideas, right? Like it's very clear that this is still describing the new idea of culture, right? It's the words that the author is choosing. We didn't really officially state this is in line with the new idea of culture, but we basically did, right? Because every sent or I say every sentence, there were only two, but every part of both of these sentences really echoes that idea of new culture, right? Or the new definition of culture being flexible. That said, we are very focused on workers and employees here, and I feel like that's a fair add. I usually, if I see an idea that's very clearly repeated from an earlier paragraph, but maybe with a slightly shifted focus, or maybe they added something slightly new. I'll just put an arrow and then plus, yeah, like empowering employees or employee flexibility or something like that, so that I don't lose context, but that I'm also really helping myself track repeated ideas. Because ultimately, our goal at the end of this exercise, and every time you read a CARS passage, is to decide what was the most discussed and supported idea that came from this passage, right? And I think so far we've got a pretty good candidate. Okay, this is our third paragraph in a row that's very focused on the new idea of culture, right? That doesn't mean that we didn't mention old, and that doesn't mean that we didn't mention that companies use both. That said, the author is using a lot of words and paragraphs to define and characterize the new idea. So it seems like this new idea of culture is going to be pretty important. We also technically, just because it's valuable to look for things like this in the future, reading other CARS passages, we did in a way officially tie this to new idea because of the exact way this paragraph was started. Right? We're saying such companies. When we say something like that, it's a transition saying like the companies we just talked about in the previous paragraph that was very clearly and explicitly tied to new culture. Such companies look for all of this, right? So just because it's kind of cool, right? That word and phrase, such companies, and then look for staff, blah, blah, blah. That is a very specific anchor to the companies we described in the last paragraph. Okay, so that would be another clue that we're continuing to describe this new idea of culture. And I completely agree, right? We'll keep that same idea that was originally introduced in P3, maybe add that idea of employee flexibility or, retraining workers, something like that, which seemed pretty negative, right? Not officially, but I don't know that I want to job hop with no job security and
Yeah,
retrain at their own
that'd be
expense and
crazy.
high stress levels. Like it wasn't official, but that parenthetical, not the most positive outlook here. It's worth keeping track of that. For myself, just for context, I put employee flexibility and then I put like a little in parentheses, a negative sign with a question mark in my map. Like, I'm not really sure that you're intentionally making this sound pretty miserable, but I'm kind of miserable when I read what you're saying about employee flexibility.
Yeah, like no
Yeah, I
job
always,
security, no career
yeah,
structure.
yeah. To leave a little note if I see anything that when reading it makes me feel a particular, valence of emotions.
Well, thank you for that, Molly. I completely agree. Let's go ahead and finish off with the last paragraph here. This is paragraph 6. In this context, the idea of differently positioned actors being active participants in a process of meaning making, a version of the new idea of culture, is attractive to managers. Okay, so we are getting into this idea that, we are sort of having this process of meaning making, right? A version of that new idea of cultures, and it's attractive to managers. So managers like the new culture idea where everyone is kind of helping create some sort of meaning. People are working together in a team. The image is associated with rhetoric about empowerment. Okay, so it comes with lots of talks about empowerment. Workers and managers are trained, quote, to make decisions in teams, taking everyone's perspective into account. So again, we're sort of delving a bit deeper into this idea of meaning making, right? Which was introduced, and I guess that's a very specific term that wasn't said before. And we're kind of saying that team decision making is sort of taught as a formal practice here, right? We want to take everyone's perspective into account, and that's kind of what they're centering on, with the managers and the workers. Their attention is also trained on this highly visible, apparently transparent decision making, as if power were dispersed and the organization decentered. Okay, so we're again putting trained in quotes here, right? So this process, it's made to look open and shared, right? It's made to look as if power is spread out, right? For me, I don't know if the author is, trying to hint to me here, like, oh, they're kind of making them feel this way, but it's not for real. But that technically hasn't been said. It's I I do want to try to take things as literally as possible. It's kind of like our previous paragraph. Like, I don't know if the author is trying to say, hey, this is very negative with the workers and the high stress. It sounds like it, but I can't assume anything, right? In theory, decisions can be more flexible. There we go, flexible again, changing with the changing conditions of the company and its workers. So again, we are ending off with kind of our arguments, just like these, very similar to the other paragraphs, right? We're ending with supposedly this sort of approach, it makes the organization more flexible, makes the organization more adaptable, changing conditions. Again, we don't know, the author didn't say specifically new idea of culture, but it's that specific wording that Molly had pointed out earlier, which is being used again, right? Flexible, changing conditions. We've seen that constantly as the definition of the new idea of culture. And we did talk about new idea of culture up here, right, with this idea of meaning making. So for me, I'd probably say that this paragraph is support for the same idea, that new idea of culture is flexible. And again, I would probably just write P6 arrow up or P6 P3. I would probably want to maybe write something, again, just something small about possibly meaning making to remind myself of it. I might just write MM, to make it quick and easy. It may not be the most important thing, but it was a majority of the paragraph. And ultimately, when we're thinking about, now that we've gotten to the end of our passage and we're thinking about what our main idea is, I think we can agree that there's been one idea here that's been repeating pretty constantly since paragraph 3, and it's the new idea of culture, right? So my main idea here, if I have my map laid out, I can see that, multiple paragraphs are following that argument in paragraph 3. I would just circle paragraph 3. And again, that's that new idea of culture, or new culture, is flexible, right? It's adaptive. It's whatever you sort of put down for that. What do you think about all that, Molly? How do you feel?
I mean, I think you're definitely right. I think we've got our main idea. Okay. And I think a lot of students are going to be uncomfortable with how this passage played out in many ways. Because we started off saying that culture is important to organize businesses, right? It's important. Okay, cool. It's important for organization. Then we had their companies are using both old and new. And we're like, okay, cool. We'll probably talk a lot about both. Maybe talk equally about old and new. Maybe we'll talk about how they integrate both. We define old, and then the entire rest of the 4 paragraphs to follow are all about new. And I mean, I know I'm like, well, why didn't we come back to how we're doing both? Like, why aren't we making old as important as new in this passage? They don't owe you that, right? And also, when you get to your main idea, this is very important. The main idea is not which idea did we mention that is broad enough to encapsulate every single thing that was mentioned in the passage. That is not your main idea. It's one of the things that I see students fall for time and time and again, especially when you have a question that directly asks, what is the main idea? Okay, they could give you culture is important in organization, and they could give you new culture or the new idea of culture gives flexibility. The first one about culture being important in organization kind of encompasses everything else, but it is not the main idea. It is not what the author is choosing to, you know, hammer into us. So, really important. The main idea is what is most repeated and supported throughout the passage. And it might be uncomfortable, but I think it's very clearly P3. And Usher, as you were reading, I feel like one thing that you did that was so strong and students can learn a lot from it is if you are seeing that, you know, after one paragraph, you're like, okay, yeah, it's the same as before. Paragraph 4, arrow to P3, right? Paragraph 5, you're like, okay, well, I'm still trying to draw an arrow. Paragraph 6, you're like, I still want to draw an arrow. As you kind of add more paragraphs, a higher volume of text that's just in alignment with the same idea, it is valuable to add a little bit about the context of that paragraph, right? Because some students hear, oh, find the repeated ideas. They're like, P1, culture is important. And just the entire, paragraph 1 or paragraph 2 is an arrow to P1, paragraph 3, arrow to P1, paragraph 4, arrow to P1. And they lose all the context. Okay, if you ever just see that you've got like 2 or 3 paragraphs in a row that are just the same as something before, ask, is it truly exactly the same? Is there anything that they're adding that is a new layer on that original argument? Still draw the arrow, but you don't want to lose all the context of the passage. So I think that was perfect, right? We didn't lose anything as we went through, but also it's very clear what our main idea should be. And that main idea is really going to set you up for success in those questions. Okay, really, there are only a handful of ideas in this passage, and I think as long as you know what the new idea of culture is, as long as you know what the old idea of culture is, really, I think you're going to do pretty well for this. So, if you haven't already, we encourage you guys to check out the 6 questions that come along with this passage. Okay, hopefully you're feeling more comfortable about how the passage or how to read and find arguments in this passage now that you've listened to our podcast. And it's time to test yourself. Okay, so you have 6 questions. Please go check them out. Again, if you're listening on February 18th, just go to jackwestin.com. You can access the passage in our dailies and complete those there. Or if you prefer, grab the link in the description and you can complete them. Okay. Make sure you have your map in front of you when you do, because that can help a lot. And use your main idea as much as you can or as much as is appropriate. right? The benefit of doing these questions now that you're done with the passage is that you really get to figure out how effective am I in my process of elimination and my reasoning skills with CARS questions. So, we hope that you give those a try. We hope that this episode has been helpful in understanding Hamburger University, best name in the business. And we hope to catch you in the next one. Thank you so much for listening, you guys.